and welcome to this video. It has been a very long time since I filmed a sit-down video, and in fact a very long time since I actually put out any videos on YouTube, so first of all, apologies for that. I have had an interesting month in April. I have been so busy at work, and it's just, my life has not really been conducive to filming very often. As you'll know if you watch my channel, I mainly put vlogs out, but I haven't really been feeling in the right headspace to be filming vlogs over April. I've been very busy with work. I've had an incredibly stressful time and have been struggling a little bit mental health wise as well, not going into any details, but if anyone appreciates the struggle of social anxiety, you will know that the last thing you want after a busy day of engaging with people is to come home and talk, even be that to a camera. So I've been a little bit missing from YouTube recently, but I have been doing a lot of reading, and now I'm feeling a bit better. I thought I would take you through the reads that I've enjoyed over the month of April. I've just got back from a short break away in Wales where I have completely rejuvenated myself. I feel much better in myself now, and have actually vlogged that trip away as well, so that will be the next video you see after this one. But as I say, I just wanted to take you through my reads from April because there have been some good ones, a few a little bit different for me than normal, and I just wanted to talk about books. So I've missed you guys and I wanted to come back. So without further ado, grab yourself a hot drink because this could well be a lengthy one, and I will take you through this lovely stack of reads from the month. So if you did watch my last vlog that I put out, which was actually the end of March now, you will know that I finished the month off by rereading my absolute favourite classic, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, and I loved that one so much that I decided to pick up another Jane Austen at the start of April. Actually the only Jane Austen that I've not read before, that being Mansfield Park. I have this very pretty cover of this little paperback Wordsworth edition, which I absolutely flew through. I really surprisingly enjoyed this. So it kept me very engaged despite being a very different sort of story to Pride and Prejudice, and one which I was not so familiar with. I have seen a film adaptation of this a couple of times, so I kind of knew vaguely what was going on in the story, and it's an enjoyable one, but not one that I would consider a favourite. However, I really surprisingly enjoyed this book. The language is always a strong point of Jane Austen's and of classics in general. I love reading this kind of wordplay, the long descriptive sentences, the kind of banter between different characters. I think she just writes absolutely beautifully, and I get great joy in the language and the literature side of this, quite apart from the plot and things like that. I was surprised to find certain aspects of this very different to the film that I knew as well, so the intrigue levels were high to keep me engaged in the story, and I really enjoyed seeing the kind of journey of self-discovery that our main character has. She begins at the start of the book as very much a kind of downtrodden, meek, mild character. So she has been sent to live with her rich relatives and is very much looked down on by these relatives and by the other children of the household, and you see her grow up and become actually more confident and grow into herself and realise that who she is, she can be as strong within that character. She doesn't need to be like everybody else to have her own strength, and I really enjoyed seeing that. You see some quite modern themes as well within this, in terms of like the relationships and things, which you don't often see in literature from this era, and all in all it was an enjoyable read, and I'm glad I started off the month with some more of my favourite classical author. I then moved on to another classic which was very different but also very enjoyable, this tiny little book called Elizabeth and Her German Garden by Elizabeth von Arnim. This one I picked up actually having seen Desi from Darling Desi talk about a couple of books by this author. This one follows our woman Elizabeth von Arnim in a kind of it's more of a diary format really than fiction. It's her recounting her tale of one particular year in which she has moved to the countryside with her family and basically takes refuge from everyday life in her garden. She's very ahead of her time, this woman. It's set in kind of the late 1800s, I believe, but all this woman wants to do is hide outdoors in nature and disappear from societal expectations and from children and husbands and everything else, and just devote her life to nature and to designing this beautiful garden. And it was a really enjoyable read. It was very quick. As I say, it was only just over 100 pages, so I flew through this in one evening sitting outside in my own garden, which was very atmospheric. But for the descriptions of nature, especially the springtime sections, this was particularly lovely, so I will definitely revisit this book again another year. And I just liked being introduced to a new classical author as well. I'd never even heard of this woman before, so it was very nice to have this as a recommendation, and as I say, I did read another by her later in the month, which I also thoroughly enjoyed. So next up, I moved a little bit forwards in time from the traditional classical authors and instead returned to one of my all-time favourite historical writers, the wonderful Agatha Christie. I read both of these books in very quick succession, so I was very, very thrilled to find on Scribd that they had some audiobooks narrated by the late great Joan Hickson, who was my first introduction to Miss Marple. She portrayed Miss Marple in the kind of 1980s, I think it was, BBC series, and was the vision of Miss Marple that drew me into wanting to watch and read lots and lots of these stories. So I listened to both of these, A Caribbean Mystery and Pocketfull of Rye, over the Easter weekend and had a thoroughly lovely time hearing that narration of that kind of almost wartime voice that she's got, or she had, was just a wonderful way to consume these stories. I have read both of these before, so I knew them very well, but I always reread Miss Marple's. They're my ultimate cosy read, and as I say, consuming them as audiobooks was a lovely way to get back into these tales. I read both of them over the Easter weekend when I had a couple of days off work. I spent most of the weekend outside, so was able to listen to these whilst out in nature, which was just wonderful. And I will, slight segue actually, and tell you about my Easter weekend. I had a lovely time. I, as I say, spent lots of time in nature. I was thrilled to find that my local woodlands had bluebells blooming really early, so I spent ages wandering about and just smelling the perfume and revelling in this beautiful vista of the gorgeous blue flowers under the trees. I had such a wonderful time. I probably will be showing you some B-roll footage of this at the moment. I took lots of pictures. And I also, for Easter, had my first go at making a simnel cake, which is kind of the traditional Easter cake that historically has been made around this time of year, and was very pleased actually with how this turned out. It was delicious, so I enjoyed eating some of that also while listening to my books. So in terms of the two Agatha Christie's that I read, first one I picked up was A Caribbean Mystery, which was very appropriate for this weekend because it was so sunny and so beautiful, so reading about the Caribbean felt very fitting. This is actually one of my favourite Miss Marples. I love the descriptions in this one of this era, this moment in time. So Miss Marple has gone away to one of the Caribbean islands as kind of a health break, basically. She's been sent by her nephew to go and get some sunshine and feel better in herself. And you get this wonderful little microcosm of British society within the hotel that she's staying. So you've got some of these very stereotypical characters that you always see in Agatha Christie novels. So you've got a young couple, you've got a vicar, you've got a rich old man, all of these very stereotyped characters which you recognise popping up time and again in these stories, and just makes them so comforting and so familiar to read about. So the rich old man in question is Mr. Raphael, who is one of my favourite characters in the Agatha Christie books. I really, really enjoy his relationship, if you like, with Miss Marple, and their view of each other I think is just wonderful and so clever. And I think you really see in this one as well, particularly, how unlikely a murder solver Miss Marple is, and how her view of the world is so clever and so attuned to what she's seeing just on her way of interpreting people's behaviour. So she's not a massively intelligent character, she's not been trained in police work, but she knows people, and her view of, like, her comparison of her society at home and other people she's encountered in the past to what she's seeing enables her to draw these parallels and then to make these very well-reasoned leaps of how people might behave and what would cause them to act as they do, which ultimately helps her solve this crime and many others as well. So I loved this one. I really, really enjoyed getting back into this one. It's not one I've read for a couple of years and was absolutely what I needed at this point in time. The other one I read straight afterwards, over the next day or so, was A Pocketfull of Rye, again by Agatha Christie, of course, another Miss Marple story. I also really like this one. This was one of the first Miss Marples I read years and years ago when I was a child. I found this in a holiday cottage and decided to read this one. And this follows one of my favourite tropes, if you like, of the Miss Marple stories, or Agatha Christie's work in general, where she uses a nursery rhyme or some sort of tale or poem to base her murder plot around. So this follows the Sing-a-Song Sixpence, A Pocketfull of Rye. If you've heard the children's nursery rhyme, you will know it. And basically the murders are framed around the events described in this nursery rhyme, which is very, very clever. Miss Marple is actually not in this one until the second half. The first half follows more the police side of the investigation. There is a poisoning of a very rich businessman, and the police go to his country manor house in the English countryside and are basically interrogating his family and delving into all of his nefarious deeds. And it's just a really clever story again. and the arrival of doddery little Miss Marple on the doorstep to help out the very baffled police detective is just wonderfully amusing to read about. And again, a very, very clever story, so I could rave all day about how much I love Agatha Christie's, but I really had a good time with these two. So the next book I picked up was yet again part of the historical subgenre, but again a slightly different one. I finally finished off the Six Tudor Queens series by Alison Weir, so my friend has lent me the entirety of this series over the past few months, probably the past year by now, and I've been steadily working my way through them. And I met up with this particular friend the Tuesday after Easter. I had a day off. Having worked the first part of Easter, I had a couple of days off afterwards, so was able to meet up with her, have a lovely day exploring the Cotswolds, some beautiful villages, a lovely National Trust house. It was just a very nostalgic escapism kind of day, and we had a really good time. But I also started reading this book. So this is the sixth in the series, as I said. This follows Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's final queen, final wife, who actually outlives him. And I really enjoyed this one. I've had a bit of a hit or miss relationship with this series. The third book in the series, the Jane Seymour book, I did really enjoy, but all of the others have been just okay. They've been interesting enough to read, but not something I would rave about and be desperate to read again in the future. This one, I'm pleased to say, was a little bit more like the Jane Seymour book in that I just felt she was a more mature character to follow, a more, not intelligent exactly, although she was very intelligent, but just more well-reasoned thoughts, and her interactions with society were not just a blind, desperate struggle to become the queen or to become somebody's wife. You know, there was a lot more going on behind the scenes, which I really enjoyed seeing. And as I say, she was a very intelligent character too, very ahead of her time with some of her political beliefs, and you know, she writes books and things like that. She's a very interesting character as Catherine, so I liked seeing the world from her perspective. And Henry, I hadn't realised this, Henry is actually her third husband, so a huge part of this book, at least half of this book, is before she even encounters the king. So that again was very interesting because you learn a whole different side to history and a whole different story of this character that you hear kind of vaguely mentioned, but Catherine isn't really particularly well known compared to some of Henry's earlier queens, so I really enjoyed seeing more of her world and her story, and also getting to conclude a series. So this was one of my favourites from the series. This one and the Jane Seymour book definitely were a step above the rest for me. But I would definitely read Alison Weir's books again. I have enjoyed reading this series, I've enjoyed my experience with it, and I'm very glad to have ticked another series off my to-be-read list for the year. So getting into the final week of the month now, and you will have noticed that this month so far has basically been classics. It's been historical books. There's been nothing fantastical and magical at all, which is very unusual for me given that I am a massive fantasy reader and most of the things I pick up are traditionally fantasy. It was nice to have a bit of a deviation from this for those few weeks. However, I did eventually pick up some fantasy. I finally have made it to reading The Golden Cage by J.D. Oswald, this one being the third book in the Ballad of Sir Benfro series. I've been meaning to read this for weeks and weeks. I did actually mention it, I think, in a couple of vlogs previously that I needed to get to this book and then have never quite got round to it, but I now have, and I did really enjoy this. Not so much as the previous ones in the series, although I think part of the reason for that is that I have spread this series out so much. So the first one I read several years ago, the second one I read about a year ago, and now this being the third. So I wasn't really as into the story as I could have been because I didn't remember all the details of what was going on. I remembered enough, of course, to know what was happening vaguely and to know who the characters were and things, but I feel like a lot of the nuances of the plot perhaps I didn't appreciate as fully as I could have done. And also I felt like plot-wise this was a bit of a filler book. You got a lot more deepening of the character stories, but not really moving forwards with the plot so much. There wasn't a huge amount of action until the very end. A lot of the characters were geographically in the same place throughout the entirety of this book. It just felt a bit slow compared to some of the others, but it was nice to be able to re-immerse myself into this world without there being tons of plot for me to have to follow and to struggle with. So it was a good book. It was probably only a 3 out of 5 star, this one, whereas the others have been 4s, I believe, but I did really enjoy it. I had missed these characters, so I was glad to be back in this very cosy, nostalgic feeling fantasy world. And I definitely want to try and get to the next one in the series a bit sooner than a year, which has been periodically how I've been reading these books. So I will definitely get to the sequel soon. It was also quite funny that I finished off the last part of this book when I went on my holiday, which was in Wales, and a lot of this book is actually based on character names and place names and things based on the Welsh language. So when you read certain words in here, I could picture places that they were describing, or I could think about, you know, I could see things on road signs that were characters in this book. It was very bizarre, and I was reading in my head, pronouncing things in the Welsh way, which was very good, but also slightly strange, but very fitting to finish this one off while I was in Wales. The next one I read on my holiday was returning to the classical genre, but this is the other book by Elizabeth von Arnim that I was alluding to at the start of the video. This is a gorgeous cover. I don't know if you can quite see that or if it's a bit bleached. I've had to have my ring light on today because it's very, very dark. It's raining outside, it's gloomy. So you probably can't quite see that cover, but it is a beautiful pale blue with this floral design, very vintage, I love it. And this book is The Enchanted April, as I say, by Elizabeth von Arnim. This, again, was one I picked up because of hearing Desi from Darling Desi talk about it. And I was just really intrigued by this story. So it's set in, I think, the 1920s, and you have these 4 women who are all from very disparate backgrounds in England, and they come together because of an advertisement in the newspaper with an offer to rent an Italian castle for the month of April. And they all decide that they want to do this. They want to go on this wonderful trip, this very once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, for some of them at least. So they put together the money and they go to Italy for the month of April to this beautiful wisteria-clad castle on the coast of Italy, and just the descriptions of the scenery in this book, quite apart from the story, I would read this again just for the descriptions. It was beautiful. It absolutely made me long to be in this place. I love Italy anyway. I've been a couple of times myself, but never at this time of year, and I just wanted to see this. It was so, so beautiful the way it was described. I also really liked the characters in this. It was surprisingly funny, which I wasn't expecting. And the 4 different women who we follow in the story, you see things from each of their perspectives, so you can see how they view each other and how this changes throughout the course of the month, and how they all have their kind of self-discovery voyages as well. And I especially liked Lady Caroline, who just wants to go and hide in the garden. I feel like the author put a lot of herself into that character, and it really showed. Having read the other book earlier in the month as well, I got that, and I absolutely relate to that. But it was a really fun read. I would definitely revisit this again in the springtime for the descriptions, as I said, but I did enjoy the plot too, and I'm really glad to have this in my classical collection. And then the final book, which I've read this month, which I finished earlier today actually, and I'm still kind of reeling from. I did it. I finally got to Master Artificer by Justin Call. I have been procrastinating this book for such a long time. Sorry, it's really, really glaring cover. It's so shiny. Absolutely stunning, if you can see there, all that gorgeous filigree, but really bright. I'll hold it back a bit like this, that's better. So this is the sequel to Master of Sorrows, which was a 5-star read for me last year. I absolutely loved. And I've been saying I would get to this book for months and months, ever since I first bought the paperback, and I've just been putting it off because I knew I wanted to really focus on this book. I knew it was one I wanted to concentrate on, so would be ideal for when I was on holiday or when I wasn't in the middle of anything else. And I've tried a couple of times, I've had a couple of full starts and not got anywhere, but I restarted this for, I think, the 3rd time when I was on holiday and have just devoured it. I have read nothing else for the last 3 days. And oh my gosh, I loved this so much. 5 out of 5 stars, one of the best books I've read this year so far. I can't believe how good this story was. This was everything I wanted it to be, everything I want out of a fantasy book. I just loved it. And I can't believe now that I have to wait so long until another one is published. And this is going to be a really long series apparently as well. So goodness knows where this is going to go because so much happened in this book. I mean, it should have done. It's a chunker. It's nearly 900 pages long, but still. I flew through this and I loved it. It was very helpful to be able to listen to this as an audiobook while on my various mountain walks over the past couple of days, and once I got home as well, and in the car while I was driving between place to place. So I did actually listen to a fair chunk of this as an audiobook, but definitely breaking it up with reading physically in between helped a lot, and I just couldn't put this book down. It was so, so good. So I don't really want to give any spoilers about what happens because so much does happen in this, but I liked that we followed various characters from the first book in their, you know, diverging paths within this world and within the events. We have one setting in a different kind of magical academy school type setting than we'd had in the first one, but learning lots about magic and a lot more about the magic systems of this world, which was very interesting. We also had a kind of city-based heist political type story, which I really enjoyed. That was very, very exciting, something a bit different for this series, but I loved following that one and the development of our one particular character, especially from the first book. There's also a section which follows kind of demons and shadow magic and torture and world of dreams and all that kind of thing, which was again very different but very exciting. I loved this. Everything about this was so intricate and so wonderful, and I now just want to reread the first one, even though I've only just finished this one. So I don't know what I'm going to do with myself now I've finished this book, but I'm definitely back on a fantasy kick, and I think you will see a lot more fantasy again in May. I hope to read just as productively, if not more, throughout the month of May, but I have had a really, really good end to the month with this book, and I'm so glad I finally read this one. So that was a very long ramble, but that was everything I've read throughout the month of April. Thank you for bearing with me and listening to this, and also thank you for bearing with the lack of videos for the last few weeks. I will definitely try to resume normal service throughout the next month. As I say, I have vlogged my trip away in Wales over the past few days, so that will be the next one coming up, and then I will try and get back to semi-regular programming over the next few weeks. I don't know what I'm going to read in May. I haven't got a set TBR yet, but there are a couple of readathons happening that I want to participate in, so I'm sure I will give you a rundown of what books I pick for those at some point. So without further ado, I will leave this video here. Thank you very much for watching this very long ramble. I hope you've enjoyed listening to some of the books that I read. Please leave me a like down below if you did enjoy it. Chat to me about any of the books in the comments below, any of your favourites for the month. I love to hear from you. And please consider subscribing if you'd like to see more content from me. As I say, I will hopefully be putting out more regular videos over the next few weeks, and it really means a lot to hear that I've got your guys' support. Thank you for watching, as I say, and I will see you again with the next video. So bye for now.